Last week, of course, was spring break, and we had two pretty awesome mission trips. One of them was to a location in Michigan, not too far away. One of them was to Mexico, just across the border from the far side of Texas. And that was a long trip. It seemed that as the people on the Mexico trip, as we were talking to people about the trip we were going to take, maybe raising support for that, telling people what we were going to do, it was almost inevitable that people would ask the question, when do you fly out? And there were 9 of us that went from SVSU, but total there were 54 from various His House campuses that went on this trip. And that seemed to be a pretty universal question. When do you fly out? And when we'd start to answer, no, we're driving, the immediate response would be, you're driving? As in, throw in a little, are you crazy in there? Kind of like when we told them the destination was Juarez, Mexico. If we were to go directly from campus to our work site in Juarez, it would have taken about 28 hours of driving, no stops, if we were to go straight there. And so you add in bathroom breaks and gas breaks and food breaks, that's a good day and a half plus of travel. So you can imagine we stopped about every 4 hours, and you can imagine besides going and finding the restroom, one of the first things that people do when they get out of the van is stretch after just sitting still for 4 hours, and then sitting still for another 4 hours, and another 4 hours, and another 4 hours. So we would stretch our stiff muscles, get some blood flowing. When we don't use our muscles for a while, they get stiff. Even when we exercise hard or work hard physically, if we don't stretch, our muscles get stiff. And tonight we're continuing part 2 of our Dangerous Prayers series. And this one's going to help us keep from becoming stiff in a relationship with God. So in part 1, our dangerous prayer was search me. The first dangerous prayer was search me. God, I know you know everything about me already, but I give you permission to search the deepest, darkest corners of my heart and my mind and reveal to me whatever might be in the way of my next step with you. So that's what we talked about right before spring break. And if you were here for that, I hope you had the opportunity to pray that enough over the last couple of weeks that God began to show you something in your life that you could be working on. So, dangerous prayer number 2 is stretch me. Stretch me. And since we're talking about stretching, that would be fun to show some cute animal pictures of stretching. Right, who doesn't like that? So, we got a squirrel stretching. We've got a wolf stretching. We've got a bear stretching. We've got a lion stretching. A fox stretching. And a deer stretching. Oh, who put that up there? I'll come back to that. I have to be honest that my relationship with God gets stiff at times. And that might be disappointed that the pastor would, their relationship with God would get stiff, but it's true. And sometimes it's because I'm not moving my spiritual muscles like I should. Maybe I'm not doing anything spiritually. And that might happen if I'm on a long vacation. I don't really have any ministry things I need to do, and I just don't feel like doing anything. Or maybe when I'm sick and just have a cold and feel horrible, I might not feel like pursuing God, doing any spiritual activities during that, and I would get stiff from that. Or maybe I'm doing spiritual things, but I'm just getting into a rut with that, doing the same things, saying the same prayers over and over. almost out of ritual or tradition rather than out of a relationship with God. And I don't use the term relationship with God lightly. It's a real two-way relationship that we have with God when we become Christians. But when I start to go on autopilot in that relationship, I start to get stiff spiritually. Or sometimes I start to buy into the illusion that busyness equates with productivity. And I think a lot of us buy into that today. And I just kind of skip over my relationship with God because I've got so much to do and I just want to get to that so I can be more productive. So I tell myself. But it kind of cheapens my prayer life when I do that. And I've actually found that it makes me less productive when I skip my personal connection with God just to go do stuff. Even if it's supposedly Christian stuff, it makes me less productive overall. I bet you can relate to one of those, maybe all three of those areas of spiritual stiffness. But maybe this whole prayer thing is brand new to you, and maybe you're spiritually stiff because you haven't officially started a relationship with God, or you haven't, maybe you've started but you haven't developed a relationship with God, and so you're just kind of spiritually stiff with that. So, but God wants, it doesn't matter where our starting point is. God just wants to take us on the next step. He wants to stretch us. Our mission at His House is to partner with God to cultivate lifelong, life-changed disciples of Jesus. And that end goal has never, ever happened instantaneously. We don't just, boom, I'm a lifelong disciple. It happens over time, one step at a time, just taking that next step and taking the next step after that as we let God stretch us. Of course, when we apply that stretching metaphor to our spiritual lives, we'd rather have the cute animal stretch, or we'd rather have the get out of the van stretch. Just get a little blood circulating, not too much. Don't want to stretch too far, get too far out of my comfort zone. When we stretch just enough, it kind of becomes a comfort thing. It's nice to have a little stretch. That's what we want. But sometimes what we need is the gut us open and put us on the rack kind of stretch. Doesn't sound fun, but sometimes that's what we need. There's the safe stretch and there's the dangerous stretch. There's the slightly out of my comfort zone stretch, and that's not a bad place to be. And then there's the I have no choice but to rely on God stretch, and that's a way better place to be. So why is that? Because when we allow God to stretch us to a breaking point, that's when we tend to see Him work through our lives most clearly. When we allow God to stretch us to a breaking point, that's when we tend to see Him work through our lives most clearly. That's when we tend to see the most fruit and the most progress and the most growth. And got a testimony tonight to go along with that.
I'm not looking at me, so I wasn't sure. Wait, I was hoping on your suggestion, so I won't use it.
Okay.
Okay, so, as many of you know, I was on the Eagle Village trip this past week, which was wonderful. And honestly, sorry Troy, but when I was there, I was not thinking about your message series. But regardless, God is good, and the biggest takeaway I got from the whole week was how powerful prayer is. It's amazing. So, I don't know where to start. Gosh, there were so many things that just time and time again, I couldn't do it, and I just gave to God, and the result was not just what I was expecting, but like far, far, far beyond what I was imagining. And it was amazing. Right from the very beginning, like I was planning it and I was super busy. So I was like, I can't do this. Like Troy said, like I have no option but to pray about this and just give it to God. And so that was kind of a breaking point for me to just kind of surrender and be like, okay, take it. Like, this is really scary for me, but just take it. So I did, and he delivers. Like, he's better than any Jimmy John's. So the biggest example I have of it is our chapel service, which was lit. It was so cool. So at the beginning of the planning stages, we were going to do this chapel service, and I was like, I don't have time to plan a chapel service on top of this whole trip. So I kind of threw it out to the team. You guys are amazing. Love you. But I was like, hey, I need someone to like head this up. There were no takers. There was none. And I was like, ah! So then God stretched me. Like this. And I was like, okay, just pray. So I just, more than I ever have, just was like, God, take it. Like this chapel service is in your hands. This whole trip is in your hands. And you guys, I can't even explain how awesome this chapel service ended up. Like, it was so cool. We had a worship dance. We had music and like instruments and singing. People, I didn't even know how to play. I didn't know Cora could play the piano, but she's a boss at it. Just so you guys know. We had a gospel rap. And we had a skit and like all these personal testimonies, and it was amazing. And just a little side note, this chapel service, we were on a very strict schedule of 45 minutes. And we didn't have time to practice everything like beforehand all together. I kid you not. We did everything, just wung it, and 44 minutes on the dot. It was great. So it was so cool, and the chapel service was the beginning of the week, and it set the scene for our entire week, and just, it impacted all the residents at Eagle Village so much. It was beautiful, and it was definitely a work of God, because, I mean, we couldn't have done it. Like, I obviously couldn't have done it, and he just stepped in, and he was like, take it, all of it, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful. So I just realized that I am so utterly powerless next to just the awesome power of God. And I've been silly, and I just realized how much better it is and how much wiser it is to give everything in my life over to God in prayer. So,
Thanks, Becca. So that's a great current example from one of us of being stretched beyond our limit and then God doing something amazing with that. So now we're going to look at a couple events recorded in the Bible that exemplify this for us also. They're both in Mark chapter 14. And at first they might not seem related at all. Encourage you to look that up, Mark chapter 14. We're going to start in verse 3. And while he was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came in with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. They scolded her. But Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me, for you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. So we've seen this story before. If you were here the first week of the semester, we talked about this woman's story. And assuming this was the same event that John records, John reveals the detail that this was Mary, who was the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And so we're going to just point out a couple things from this passage. This offering that Mary brought was an alabaster jar of nard. And those might be a couple of weird words for us. Nard was a concentrated perfume that was very costly. Mary brought just a pound of this perfume, and it cost a year's worth of wages for this pound of perfume. And an alabaster flask was a jar carved out of a soft, translucent mineral, kind of a precious stone. And a flask of perfume like this was often sealed permanently once it was filled for long-term storage, keep the perfume fresh. And so when you wanted to use the perfume, you would have to break the alabaster jar to get the perfume out. So being worth a year's wages, this flask represented Mary's past. This would have taken her a long time to save up to purchase this jar. And it would have represented her future. And that was security in her hands, a year's worth of wages. That was comfort. That was control. So do you think that act of worship stretched Mary? Yeah, absolutely it stretched her. That flask in a lot of ways represented her life. And she broke it and poured it out for Jesus. So Mark follows up this story with another short event describing being broken and poured out. And it's the Last Supper of Jesus. The last meal that Jesus had with his disciples before he was crucified. So we're going to skip down to verse 22, Mark 14, 22 through 25. As they were eating, they took bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to them, and said, Take, this is my body. And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank it. And he said to them, This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink it again of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. So this is where Jesus gave us communion. And they're sharing the Passover meal together, celebrating kind of the exodus out of Egypt. And Jesus took the unleavened bread and he broke it. Said, This is my body sacrificed for sins. And he poured the wine and said, This represents his blood. It was going to be poured out for sin, for a sin offering for us. Hebrews 9:22 tells us that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. And that's because we serve a God who is both holy and loving, and not just a nice person. He's got both of those. So Jesus himself was literally broken and poured out for us. So did that stretch Jesus? I mean, he's Jesus. He could handle that. Yes, it stretched Jesus. He loves comfort just as much as the next person. He didn't want to go through with the cross. He had deep anxiety knowing that the cross was coming up in his life. Matthew 26:39 said he prayed to the Father that the Father would reveal an alternate way instead of the cross. But ultimately he said, not my will, but your will. He submitted to the Father's will. He was stretched beyond his breaking point. And God used that to bless the world. So now I'd like to tie in what may have seemed like a completely random picture in the Facebook event that I put out there. So this was an action figure from when I was a kid. This was Stretch Armstrong. And so this is when I was a little kid, so like 70s time action figure. But recently, just a couple of years ago, he was in a car commercial. I'll show you that just for fun. Just hit the next one.
Hey, I'm Stretch Armstrong. Remember how pumped you were when you got me for the holidays? You tried to pull my arms off? Didn't happen. Well, feel that excited again with the new Honda Accord during Happy Honda Days. It comes with a rear view camera and Pandora compatibility. Nice. And just look at all this space. Yeah. I still got it. Get something you'll love at the Happy Honda Day sales event.
So, that was Stretch Armstrong. Now, back in the 70s when most action figures were either immovable or they had like 3 joints you could move them at, Stretch Armstrong was pretty cool in that he could stretch any direction you wanted to. Just he could move in any kind of way and put him in any position. And he could be stretched, like shown in the magazine article. And the cool thing was that he was strong. I mean, he was shaped like a bodybuilder. He was tough. And no matter how hard you pulled on him, how far you stretched him, he wouldn't break. But that's a contrast to our stretching, isn't it? We do have a breaking point. We do have limits, whether they're real limits or felt limits. And let's face it, if we had some awesome superhero abilities like Stretch Armstrong or Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four or Elastigirl from the Incredibles, and we could bend and stretch any way we wanted to, really, we would never really be stretched because it would all stay in our comfort zone and we'd never be stretched beyond our limits. So, that's what's dangerous about our prayer for tonight. When we pray for God to stretch us, it very well could stretch us beyond our breaking point, beyond our limit. And actually, that's kind of the goal for us. God, stretch me, break me and pour me out so that I rely on you. God, stretch me, break me, and pour me out so that I rely on you. Like I said earlier, when we allow God to stretch us to a breaking point, it's when we tend to see him work through our lives the most clearly. So like Becca shared about reaching her limit with the mission trip and then God doing something amazing with it, like Mary of Bethany breaking and pouring out her future, her security as an act of worship. Like Jesus' body and blood being broken and poured out for us, for our forgiveness. God, will you stretch me? That's our dangerous prayer. And we've got a couple of very tangible applications tonight. One for tonight and one that we can apply over the next week and a half. And we're going to do that one first. So our Bible awareness event, Crave, starts next Monday. It will go nonstop through Thursday night of next week as we read the entire Bible out loud, Genesis through Revelation. And this is something we do once per year. So it's not part of our regular routine. And that by itself makes it maybe a little bit outside of our comfort zone. And for some of us, it might be a stretch just to participate in that. But there are a lot of ways that God could use that event to stretch us. By participating, you might be called out as a Christian or as someone who's interested, curious about that, by classmates, by roommates, by people you haven't talked with that about. You might not be a very strong out loud reader. You might not be naturally good at looking for the curious, looking for people who are questioning things, looking for the lonely and seeking them out and including them. You might not feel equipped to answer questions people might have about the Bible or go through the gospel with someone. You might not have much experience showing hospitality and sharing your food with others and making an area that's welcoming. If you're not much of a servant, cleaning up after other people's mess to keep the area tidy and looking inviting might be a stretch for you. It might be uncomfortable to actually invite someone who's unchurched to to a Christian event. It would be comfortable for most of us to not do those things. It would be comfortable if we just kept our distance and not participate in that. It's an event that spans 4 days of the week. It takes almost 3 24-hour days to complete. And there's 6 days from now until when we start that is opportunity to spread the word and invite people to it. I'm sure if we ask God to stretch us, He could find a way to use this event to stretch us in some way. But it'll be dangerous if we do that. The immediate action we can take tonight is that we're going to take communion. And the elements are up front here, and it's actually a gluten-free cracker. As you're ready, if you are a Christian, you can go out, break a piece of cracker off, dip it in the juice, and then take that. If you're not there yet with Jesus, that's okay. Just pass on it, and we won't be dismissing by rows or anything, so you won't be singled out or anything if you pass on that. But there's something that Luke shared about the Last Supper that the other gospel writers didn't. And that's in Luke 22:19. He said that Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." Do what? Eat some food and drink some juice to remember the sacrifice that you made? Yes, but what if there's more to it than that? Remember the theme of being broken and poured out? Do this in remembrance of me. So, yes, use communion to remember how Jesus sacrificed for us, but what if we also used it for our own sacrifice? Stretch me, God. Let me be broken, poured out for others in remembrance, in honor of the way you were broken and poured out for me. It's a dangerous prayer. Nobody will know whether or not you pray that as you partake in communion tonight. But we have the opportunity to implement that right now.